The first thing most Black visitors notice is not hostility, it is silence. A silence so deliberate it feels engineered. Smiles freeze halfway. Conversations stall mid-sentence. Children are gently redirected indoors. Doors that were open moments earlier close without explanation. This is not the peaceful simplicity sold in tourist brochures or Sunday school pamphlets. This is a boundary being activated, and it is not accidental. What is happening in that silence is not hatred in the modern sense. It is something older, colder, and far more disciplined. It is the activation of Ordnung. Ordnung is often translated lazily as rules, but that misses its true function. Ordnung is the operating system of Mennonite life. It governs behavior, appearance, labor, speech, and social proximity. It is how a community with no police force, no formal hierarchy, and no written constitution maintains cohesion across generations. Ordnung is not enforced with force. It is enforced with belonging, and belonging is conditional. To understand how Mennonites treat Black visitors, you have to understand that Mennonite communities do not begin from the assumption that anyone belongs. Belonging is earned through time, submission, and cultural fluency. Faith alone is insufficient. Good intentions are irrelevant. What matters is whether a person instinctively knows how to disappear into the collective. Most outsiders fail this test. Black visitors fail it faster and more visibly. This is not because Mennonites sit around discussing race. They do not. Race as a concept is largely absent from their moral vocabulary. What replaces it is something they consider more righteous: separation from the world. The world to Mennonites is loud, unstable, political, and dangerous. It is the source of persecution, temptation, and spiritual decay. For centuries, survival meant minimizing contact with it. That survival instinct hardened into tradition. Mennonites came to North America carrying generational trauma, memories of imprisonment, exile, and execution for refusing military service or state churches. Their ancestors were marked as heretics, hunted, drowned, burned. The lesson learned was simple and brutal. Visibility invites violence. Difference attracts attention. Attention leads to death. So they learned to blend, to submit, to become unremarkable. By the time Mennonite communities stabilized in North America, this instinct had transformed into a theology of quietness. Loudness was suspect. Self-assertion was sinful. Emotional expression was indulgent. The righteous person was the one who took up the least space. This ethic shaped everything, including who felt safe inside the community. When Mennonite settlements expanded in the 18th and 19th centuries, they did so in overwhelmingly white regions. Land was acquired cheaply, often as others moved west or fled industrialization. Communities grew inward, not outward. Marriages reinforced sameness. Language preserved separation. Worship rituals emphasized humility and restraint. Race was never debated because it never had to be. When Black Americans began migrating north in large numbers during the Great Migration, Mennonite communities largely remained where they were: rural, insulated, and socially closed. They did not participate in overt segregationist politics, but they also did not challenge them. Their theology emphasized non-resistance, not justice; avoidance, not confrontation. This distinction matters. Non-resistance allowed Mennonites to see themselves as morally superior to a violent world, but it also provided an excuse to disengage from structural injustice. Slavery, segregation, redlining, these were worldly problems. Mennonites believed their task was to remain pure, not to reform society. Purity, however, requires boundaries. By the mid-20th century, Mennonite communities had become masters of quiet exclusion. They did not hang signs. They did not shout slurs. They simply maintained patterns that reproduced whiteness without naming it. Schools taught children who belonged. Church discipline corrected those who deviated. Marriage sealed the perimeter. When Black visitors began appearing more frequently, through mission work, employment, religious curiosity, the system responded not with aggression, but with confusion. Confusion is dangerous in a culture built on predictability. Mennonite social life is governed by unwritten protocols learned from childhood: how close you stand when speaking, how long you maintain eye contact, when you laugh, when you lower your gaze, when you speak, and when you remain silent. These cues are not optional. They signal submission to the collective rhythm. Black visitors often violate these protocols without intention. Their speech may be more animated, their posture more upright, their emotional expression more visible. None of this is inherently negative. In Mennonite culture, it is destabilizing. Destabilization triggers correction, but correction is rarely direct. Directness risks conflict, and conflict is seen as a moral failure. Instead, Mennonites correct through withdrawal. Interaction becomes formal. Hospitality becomes procedural. Warmth is replaced with politeness. This shift is subtle enough that many Black visitors blame themselves. They replay conversations, searching for offense. They wonder if they spoke too loudly, laughed too freely, asked too many questions. They sense disapproval but cannot locate its source. That ambiguity is not accidental. It is a feature of the system. Mennonite discipline operates through uncertainty. When someone is unsure why they are being distanced, they are more likely to self-correct. They become quieter, smaller, more cautious. This works effectively on insiders who understand the stakes. Outsiders, especially Black visitors unfamiliar with these dynamics, experience it as emotional whiplash. The psychological toll begins early. Black families who visit Mennonite communities, whether for worship, business, or education, often report that their children feel it first. Children are exquisitely sensitive to shifts in tone. They notice when playmates disappear, when invitations stop, when adults watch them too closely. Mennonite children are taught obedience and restraint from a young age. They are corrected quickly and consistently. Black children, raised in different cultural contexts, may express curiosity or excitement more openly. This difference is interpreted not as cultural variation but as a lack of discipline. Parents notice teachers redirecting their children more often. They hear gentle but pointed comments about behavior. So much energy, very expressive. These phrases are not neutral. They signal deviation from the ideal Mennonite child. Quiet, compliant, self-contained. No one says the word race. Everyone feels its weight. For Black parents, this creates an impossible dilemma. Do they encourage their children to suppress themselves to fit in, or do they protect their children's sense of self at the cost of belonging? Either choice carries loss. Many choose distance. This is how Mennonite homogeneity perpetuates itself without explicit exclusion. The environment becomes uncomfortable enough that outsiders leave on their own. The community remains intact. No confrontation occurs. The ordning is preserved. From inside, this looks like peace. From outside, it feels like erasure. Adults experience a parallel process. Black visitors who attend Mennonite worship services often describe an initial sense of welcome. Handshakes, polite greetings, an invitation to sit anywhere. But worship is where the deeper boundaries assert themselves. Mennonite services are austere by design. Hymns are sung slowly, sometimes stretching a single syllable across several seconds. There is no harmony, no rhythm, no emotional swell. The voice is meant to disappear into the group. Individual tone is suppressed. For Black visitors raised in traditions where worship is embodied, where clapping, swaying, and vocal affirmation are signs of reverence, this environment can feel suffocating. If they adjust and remain quiet, they feel invisible. If they do not, they feel watched. Sermons reinforce this dynamic. Preachers emphasize submission, humility, obedience to authority. Pride is condemned relentlessly. The greatest sin is not injustice, but self-will. This theological emphasis has consequences. Black visitors, aware of the historical association between submission and racial oppression, often experience these messages differently. What Mennonites hear as spiritual discipline, Black listeners may hear as a warning. Do not resist, do not question, do not assert. The gap between intent and impact is vast. Attempts to bridge it are rare because Mennonite culture discourages introspection about power. Authority is accepted as divinely ordained. Questioning it risks pride. Discussions about race, privilege, or historical harm feel dangerously close to rebellion. So the subject is avoided. Avoidance does not neutralize tension, it displaces it. The tension resurfaces in everyday interactions. Who is invited to help with communal labor? Who is trusted with responsibility? Who is allowed to teach children? Black visitors may be praised for their work ethic, yet never asked to participate in decision-making. They remain peripheral. This peripheral status is reinforced through language. Mennonites refer to outsiders as English, a term that flattens all non-Mennonites into a single category. But Black visitors often sense they occupy a subcategory, the English who are different even from other English. This difference is rarely articulated, but it is felt. It is felt when questions about background become more probing, when curiosity shades into scrutiny, when a Black visitor's presence becomes a topic of discussion rather than an accepted fact. Gossip plays a role here. Mennonite communities rely heavily on informal communication. News travels quickly, quietly. A Black visitor's behavior, perceived or real, is discussed among trusted members. Judgments form without the visitor's knowledge. These judgments shape future interactions. By the time a Black visitor senses something is wrong, the narrative has often already solidified. They are nice but different, well-meaning but worldly, faithful but not quite one of us. These labels are not malicious. They are defensive. They protect the community from change. Change is the true threat Mennonite culture fears. Not Blackness itself, but what Black presence symbolizes. Diversity, dialogue, adaptation. Each of these requires renegotiating ordning. And ordning is not just a set of rules. It is the mechanism by which Mennonites believe they remain faithful. To alter it feels like betrayal of ancestors who suffered to preserve it. This is the emotional core of the friction. Mennonites are not guarding prejudice. They are guarding memory. memory of persecution, memory of survival through separation, memory of a world where blending in meant staying alive. Black visitors, carrying a different historical memory, one of enforced invisibility and coerced submission, collide with this worldview in ways neither side fully understands. The collision is quiet, it leaves no headlines, but it leaves marks, and those marks accumulate. By the time a Black family decides to stop visiting, the community often interprets their departure as confirmation that they were never serious. The system absolves itself. The silence resumes. What remains unexamined is the cost, to the visitors who leave feeling unseen, and to the community that mistakes absence for harmony. What makes this friction so difficult to confront is that Mennonite communities genuinely believe they are behaving correctly. In their moral framework, restraint is virtue, distance is respect, silence is wisdom. When a Black visitor experiences these behaviors as rejection, Mennonites often interpret that reaction as misunderstanding, or worse, as evidence of spiritual immaturity. This is where the psychological damage deepens. Mennonite culture trains its members to distrust emotion. Feelings are unreliable. They are associated with pride, impulsiveness, and loss of self-control. Faith is demonstrated through steadiness, not passion. When Black visitors express hurt, confusion, or frustration, those emotions are not received as signals of harm. They are received as disruptions. Disruption is the cardinal sin. As a result, Black visitors who attempt to articulate their experience often encounter a wall of calm defensiveness. "We didn't mean anything by it. Everyone is treated the same. You're reading too much into it." These responses are not calculated gaslighting. They are sincere, and they are devastating because they erase the visitor's reality while preserving the community's self-image. Over time, this erasure takes a measurable toll on Black families who attempt sustained engagement. Parents describe constant vigilance, monitoring tone, volume, body language. Children learn quickly that curiosity must be muted, questions rationed, spontaneity becomes a liability. This is not assimilation, it is self-surveillance. Psychologists who study minority stress describe this state as hypervigilance, the continuous effort to anticipate disapproval and adjust behavior accordingly. In Mennonite spaces, hypervigilance is mistaken for humility. The quieter a Black visitor becomes, the more respectful they are perceived to be. The cost is internalized. Children begin to associate goodness with disappearance. Parents struggle with guilt, wondering if they are failing their children by keeping them in environments that demand erasure, or failing their faith by leaving. Some stay and endure, others withdraw quietly. Both outcomes serve the system. For Mennonite families observing this dynamic, there is rarely a moment of reckoning. The absence of conflict is interpreted as success. The Black family's departure is explained through neutral language. It just wasn't a good fit. The deeper questions, why it wasn't a fit, who defines fit, and at what cost, remain unasked. This pattern repeats across regions and decades. It is important to understand that Mennonite resistance to introspection is not accidental. It is theological. Anabaptist tradition places heavy emphasis on obedience to the community. Individual conscience is valued only insofar as it aligns with collective discernment. To question the community is to elevate the self. This makes discussions of systemic harm nearly impossible. When Black visitors raise concerns about racial dynamics, Mennonites often respond by reframing the issue as interpersonal rather than structural. If someone treated you poorly, that's unfortunate. The system itself is never interrogated. Doing so would require acknowledging that ordnung, believed to be God-honoring, can cause harm. That acknowledgement would destabilize everything. The fear beneath this resistance is not moral failure. It is collapse. Mennonite communities have watched other religious groups fracture under the weight of modern identity politics, cultural pluralism, and internal dissent. They interpret these fractures as cautionary tales. Better to remain small, pure, and misunderstood than large and divided. This calculus shapes how Black visitors are positioned. They are welcome to observe, to learn, even to admire, but not to reshape. Influence flows inward, not outward. Any presence that implies change is quietly neutralized. Neutralization takes many forms. One of the most effective is spiritualization. If a Black visitor struggles, Mennonites may interpret that struggle as a test of faith. The path is narrow. True discipleship is hard. Suffering is normalized. The question becomes not whether the environment is harmful, but whether the visitor is willing to endure it. This logic is devastatingly effective because it cloaks exclusion in holiness. Another mechanism is deflection through mission rhetoric. Mennonites pride themselves on international mission work, often in Africa and the Caribbean. They point to these efforts as evidence of racial openness. What is rarely examined is the asymmetry. Mennonites are comfortable exporting their culture, but deeply uncomfortable importing others. Missionaries are celebrated for adapting superficially, learning local languages, wearing appropriate clothing, while preserving Mennonite authority structures. When Black believers arrive in Mennonite spaces and expect reciprocal adaptation, the request feels illegitimate. The message is subtle but clear. We will meet you where you are, as long as you do not ask us to move. This imbalance is keenly felt by Black Mennonites, who attempt to bridge worlds. They are often positioned as translators, expected to explain Black culture to Mennonites and Mennonite culture to Black communities. This role is emotionally exhausting and rarely acknowledged. Worse, these individuals are often used as proof that the system is fair. We have Black members. Their presence becomes symbolic, not transformative. They are included without being empowered. Empowerment would require shared authority. Authority in Mennonite communities is deeply gendered and racialized, though rarely named as such. Leadership roles are typically held by older white men, selected through communal discernment that favors familiarity and trust. Trust is built through decades of shared history. Outsiders, by definition, lack this history. Black members, even those baptized and committed, face an invisible ceiling. They may teach Sunday school. They may lead service projects. They are unlikely to be ordained or invited into core decision-making circles. This exclusion is rationalized through language of readiness and maturity. In time, when they know us better. Time, however, stretches indefinitely. The psychological impact of this ceiling is profound. Black Mennonites report feeling perpetually provisional, never fully secure in their standing, always subject to re-evaluation. Mistakes that would be forgiven in white members are scrutinized. Deviations are remembered longer. This dynamic extends to marriage. Interracial relationships within Mennonite communities are rare and fraught. While not explicitly forbidden, they challenge deeply ingrained assumptions about continuity. Marriage is not just a personal union. It is a mechanism of cultural reproduction. It ensures that children are raised within the ordinance. When a white Mennonite considers marrying a Black partner, the community's anxiety spikes. Questions arise about child rearing, cultural compatibility, and social perception. These concerns are framed as practical, not racial. The effect is the same. Couples face increased scrutiny. Families may express quiet disappointment. Support becomes conditional. Some relationships do not survive this pressure. Others do, at the cost of estrangement. The children of these unions occupy a particularly precarious position. They embody the future Mennonite community's claim to desire: faithful, diverse, committed. Yet they unsettle visual sameness. Their existence forces a question the community has avoided. Can Mennonite identity survive without whiteness? For many, the answer remains unspoken but firm. This resistance has long-term consequences beyond individual harm. Mennonite communities are aging. Young people leave in significant numbers, drawn to broader society. Those who remain face shrinking congregations and labor shortages. Black visitors and converts could represent renewal. Instead, they are filtered out. The irony is stark. A tradition founded on radical inclusion, adult baptism, voluntary faith, rejection of state power, now struggles to include those who differ visibly from its historic norm. The tools that once protected the community now constrain it. Some Mennonite leaders recognize this quietly. They worry about stagnation. They see the moral cost of exclusion, but they are constrained by the same system they inherited. Change requires consensus. Consensus requires trust. Trust requires sameness. The loop closes. For Black visitors, the message becomes clear over time. You may be welcomed, but you will not be centered. You may be respected, but you will not belong fully. You may be loved, but only at a distance. Many leave with a sense of unresolved grief. Not anger, though that exists, but sadness. Sadness that a community preaching peace could feel so cold. Sadness that shared faith was not enough. Others internalize the rejection as personal failure. They wonder if they were too loud, too visible, too much. The system thrives on this self-blame. What remains largely unexamined is how Mennonite children learn these patterns. They are not taught racism explicitly. They absorb it implicitly through who is present, who is absent, who is deferred to, who is corrected. They learn that difference requires management. This learning shapes the next generation's responses. When a Black visitor arrives, the children already know how to react, not with cruelty, with caution. They have been trained to sense threat without naming it. Thus, the silence reproduces itself. Breaking this cycle would require Mennonite communities to confront a truth they have long avoided, that their commitment to separation has become a commitment commitment to exclusion, and that their peace has been purchased with invisibility. That confrontation has not yet occurred in any widespread way. The long-term consequences of this unresolved friction are not dramatic. They are not explosive. They are slow, cumulative, and corrosive. And because Mennonite culture measures health by the absence of visible conflict, these consequences often go unnoticed until they are irreversible. One consequence is moral atrophy. When a community repeatedly avoids examining its own power, its ethical reflexes dull. Mennonites pride themselves on being separate from the moral failures of the wider world: violence, greed, domination. Yet racial exclusion does not require cruelty to persist. It requires only passivity. And passivity, when sanctified, becomes indistinguishable from righteousness. Over time, this creates a moral blind spot. Mennonites become adept at identifying sin in individuals while remaining incapable of recognizing harm produced by systems. This blindness is reinforced by their theology. Sin is personal. Repentance is individual. Structural injustice does not fit neatly into this framework. As a result, when Black visitors describe patterns of exclusion, Mennonites often search for a single offending behavior to correct. When none can be identified, the complaint is dismissed. The system remains untouched. Another consequence is relational impoverishment. Communities that resist difference limit their emotional range. Mennonite social life is already restrained by design. Add to that the absence of cross-cultural relationships, and the result is a narrowing of empathy. People become skilled at maintaining harmony with those who mirror them, and deeply uncomfortable with those who do not. This discomfort is then misinterpreted as discernment. Something doesn't feel right becomes a spiritual intuition rather than a learned bias. The inability to name the source of discomfort makes it harder to challenge. For Black families who leave Mennonite spaces, the impact lingers long after departure. Many report a lingering distrust of religious communities, especially those that emphasize humility and peace. They have learned that these virtues can mask exclusion just as effectively as overt hostility. Some carry shame, wondering if they were wrong to expect more. Others carry anger, sharpened by the knowledge that no one will ever ask them why they left. Their absence will be explained, not investigated. Children raised in these environments often struggle with identity. Those who adapt successfully may later question what they sacrificed. Those who refuse to adapt may internalize the belief that they are inherently disruptive. Both outcomes fracture the self. For Mennonite communities, the cost is demographic and spiritual stagnation. As rural populations decline and younger generations drift away, many congregations face an uncertain future. They speak anxiously about faith retention, about the loss of tradition. Rarely do they connect this decline to their inability to integrate difference. They tell themselves that faithfulness requires shrinking. But history suggests otherwise. Religious movements that survive do so by discerning which traditions are essential and which are protective habits mistaken for holiness. Mennonites, bound tightly to inherited forms, struggle with this discernment. The presence of Black visitors and converts represents not a threat, but a test of whether Anabaptism is a living faith or a preserved artifact, a test of whether peace is merely the absence of noise or the presence of justice. So far, many communities have chosen preservation. This choice is reinforced by the way Mennonites narrate themselves. They see their history as one of suffering and marginalization. This narrative makes it difficult to acknowledge their position of relative privilege within a racialized society. To see oneself as both oppressed historically and complicit presently requires a level of complexity the culture does not encourage. When Mennonites are asked to consider racism, they often respond by recounting persecution stories. Martyrs drowned in rivers, ancestors driven from land. These stories are true. They are also incomplete. They do not account for the ways Mennonites benefited from whiteness in America: access to land, insulation from surveillance, freedom to practice their faith without racialized suspicion. These benefits were never interrogated. They were simply absorbed. Black visitors, by their presence, disrupt this narrative. They remind Mennonites that suffering is not evenly distributed, and that withdrawal from injustice does not equal innocence. The discomfort this generates is profound. Some Mennonites respond by doubling down on separation. They retreat further into insularity. They frame diversity as distraction. They spiritualize sameness as obedience. Others, quietly and often painfully, begin to question. They notice who is missing. They listen to stories of those who left. They feel the hollowness beneath the calm. These individuals often find themselves isolated within their own communities. To raise questions is to risk being seen as prideful, worldly, or divisive. Many choose silence. Others leave. This internal attrition compounds the external one. Meanwhile, the broader society continues to change. Racial conversations intensify. Expectations of accountability grow. Mennonite communities, largely unchanged, find themselves increasingly out of step. Their silence, once interpreted as humility, begins to read as avoidance. For Black observers, the pattern is clear. Mennonite peace is conditional. It extends fully only to those who conform. For everyone else, it is distant and fragile. This does not negate the genuine kindness many Mennonites display. It contextualizes it. Kindness without inclusion remains limited. Hospitality without power sharing is incomplete. The most sobering truth is this: Mennonites are not failing because they are uniquely prejudiced. They are failing because they have mistaken survival strategies for eternal truths. What once protected them now constrains them. Black visitors are not outsiders knocking at the gate. They are mirrors reflecting a question Mennonites have avoided for generations. What does faithfulness require when the world no longer threatens you with extinction, but asks you to expand? There is no easy answer. Change would require grief. Grief for a version of community that felt safe because it was closed. It would require relinquishing the comfort of sameness. It would require learning to distinguish humility from self-erasure and peace from avoidance. It would require listening without defending. Until that happens, the pattern will continue. Black visitors will arrive hopeful. They will encounter silence. They will sense the boundaries. They will decide, consciously or not, that the cost is too high, and Mennonite communities will remain intact, calm, and quietly diminished. The truth beneath the simplicity is not shocking because it is cruel. It is shocking because it is human. A people shaped by fear of the world learned to keep it at bay so well that they now struggle to welcome those who come in peace. Seeing that clearly does not demand condemnation. It demands honesty. Only with that honesty can the silence finally be understood, not as peace, but as a question waiting to be answered. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.